I'm a 26-year-old female from Pennsylvania. Back when I was in high school, I had a friend who I'll call M. M and I would do everything together since we were very close. We would gossip, study, talk about guys we liked, all the normal stuff girls do in high school. The area we live in is kind of unique in that there's a large population in most of our area, but you're only about 10-minute drive away from being in a very rural farmland. As I mentioned before, we talked a lot about guys we liked, which then inevitably led to venting with each other about those guys. One night, after we finally gained the sweet freedom of a driver's license, we decided to drive around the most rural areas around us and just spend time venting, talking, and belting Taylor Swift lyrics at the top of our lungs. We pulled off a remote road where there was a dead end up against a cornfield. In front of the dead end stood a single street sign reading, "Dead End," if you can imagine that. We sat there for a bit before getting heated over some guy one of us had been talking to and decided it would be fun to head to the grocery store not far from there and grab some eggs to throw at the street sign. We spent the next 2 hours taking turns throwing 24 eggs at that street sign while we continued to get our feelings out to each other. This dead end became our spot for a long time while we were in high school, and we went there whenever we needed a night, just the two of us, and to get some boy rage out of our system. I still remember the final night we would go to our spot, as if it was yesterday. We turned down our favorite road at around 9:30 p.m. on a Saturday in the early days of summer. The air was cool and crisp enough that we wore sweatshirts. The smell of freshly mowed grass filled the air as we cruised down this road towards the dead end. I was the one driving this night and noticed only a few cars parked on the sides of the road. This wasn't really uncommon as there were a number of farmhouses on this street. We pulled up and began our normal routine of throwing eggs at this street sign and complaining about a boy that I was upset about. After about 20 minutes, we plopped down on the hood of my old Nissan to take a break. We were both feeling better at this point, enjoying the beautiful stars and the nearly full moon. Suddenly, we heard the crunch of footsteps come from somewhere in the cornfield. Since this was early summer, newly planted corn was only at ground level. This field was just a black abyss that we could only see the first few feet into. "Did you hear that?" Em said to me in a bit of a worried tone. "Yeah, I did," I said. "You don't think that was a deer, do you?" Em said with a half chuckle. Em had a completely irrational fear of deer, which was funny to me, but not always so funny to her. "I'm sure it was just a squirrel," I said to try and reassure her. That was short-lived, as we heard another distinct crunch of a footstep, but this time we could tell where it was coming from since it sounded much closer. We were both freaked out at this point and decided to get into the car. We got in and shut the doors to feel a little bit safer. After some words, we decided we wanted to leave. When I turned on the engine, my headlights turned on to reveal a man standing no more than 20 feet into the field wearing a black hoodie. Em and I both screamed at the top of our lungs as I threw the car into reverse and floored it. I still have no idea how I made it to the end of that street without slamming into one of the cars further down. We finally turned around and felt much safer once we were closer to the houses. We never even noticed the guy move. We were so focused on getting out of there. We were freaked out the whole way home as we drove as fast as we could. The 25 minutes it took to get back to my house felt like forever. What could that guy have been doing out there? How long was he standing there staring at us? Was he planning on trying to hurt us? It seemed like each question only freaked us out further. My parents were not home since my dad was traveling for work, and my mom was out with some of her girlfriends. So we decided not to tell them about what happened just yet, and honestly, I didn't even think to tell them. We got in our comfy clothes and both got under the covers in my bed and turned on the TV for some background noise. We talked for another 2 hours about what happened and eventually started to loosen up and try to make light of the situation. Around 12:30, we were starting to get pretty sleepy and were just about to call it a night. Just when I was about to fall asleep, the feeling of dread flushed through my body as I heard a window break in the kitchen downstairs. I live in a pretty populated area, as I said before, and as Em and I were both paralyzed with fear, the only thing I could think of doing was to open my bedroom window and scream for help as loud as I possibly could. Em got up and locked the door as I did this. After about 3 screams at the top of my lungs, we heard loud, thundering footsteps racing down the stairs and then heard the back door slam shut. I also must have woken up one of my neighbors, who immediately called the police. The police searched the area but weren't able to find anything, which we kind of expected. We told them all about our spot and how he saw someone watching us in the field. But none of the people who live on that street had any idea who it could have been. This was by far one of the scariest nights of my life, and knowing that whoever that was in my house was only a few steps away from coming into my room still haunts me to this day. I'm a 20-year-old female living in Ohio. The town I live in is a pretty nice area, very low crime rate, lots of friendly people, and a lot of money. To give a little bit of background, I was a pool lifeguard during my summers as a high school student. I worked at a country club that was considered the third best country club in the area, for whatever that's worth. If you were to ask me, any country club would scream status to me. Anyway, one summer while I was working, I met a woman who had 3 children and was at the pool with her nanny. I thought this was odd since I had never run into anyone else who brought the nanny with them to help watch 3 children at a pool. But hey, how people spent their money is none of my business. In the later half of that summer, my boss came up to me and asked if I had any jobs lined up for when the pool closed for the season. I told her that I didn't, but was looking around for something to do. I was going into my senior year after all, so I wanted to have money to do things with my friends. My boss told me her friend who goes to the pool was looking for a babysitter and that she could introduce me to her. I of course thanked her and said that sounded great. When she introduced me to her friend, I instantly recognized the woman as the one who had the nanny with her. Apparently she had fired that woman and was looking for someone to watch her kids a few days a week. She seemed like a nice enough woman, so I graciously accepted and planned to start watching her kids in a few weeks when school started up. The first time I went to her house, I was taken back by how nice it was. Everything was so clean and organized. It was that day when I first officially met her 3 kids. At the time, they were 4, 5, and 7. They were sweet little girls, and honestly, I really liked watching them. That entire year I watched them 3 to 4 days per week, and they paid me very generously, so I was enjoying the job. Nothing creepy had ever happened at night when the girls' parents weren't home, and the neighborhood was very upscale, so I always felt very safe. But one night when I was 19, that all changed. The girls' parents went out for dinner, and they told me they would be back around 12:30. They really only went out this late about once per month, and they would go meet friends for some dinner. I didn't mind, and they paid me extra on nights like this. On weekend nights, the girls were allowed to stay up a little bit later, so we started to get ready for bed around 8:45. I ran them a warm bath and bathed the 2 youngest while their older sister got ready for bed in their parents' room. I was doing our usual routine and sharing some laughs with the girls, when suddenly, the youngest in an excited but curious tone said, "Mommy's home?" I said, "What do you mean?" Almost before I could even finish that sentence, the home alarm started blaring. My heart felt like it fell into my feet. I could hear office window open between each siren of the alarm. As my fight or flight kicked in, I told the girls to stay quiet as I grabbed them and pulled them out of the tub. I tried to remain quiet as we hurried into their parents' room and locked the door. Their older sister was in their parents' master bedroom crying. I huddled them all up and told them everything was fine and that I would go check it out. I'm sure it was just a mistake. There was an alarm pad in their parents' room, so I went past and looked over the railing very slowly. I looked through the half-lit downstairs to try and see any signs of movement, without being too obvious, of course, but I didn't see anything. I went back to the alarm pad and typed in the code to shut it off. As I stood at the edge of the master bedroom doorway, I couldn't hear anything. The house was silent. I slowly walked over to the other railing where there was a straight view into the office. Both of the windows were closed. I was starting to think the alarm going off was simply an error with the system. As I closely inspected from the upstairs and could not see anything, I turned around to go get the girls and told them everything was fine. After the girls calmed down a little bit, we started to walk down the hallway to their room. As we were walking by the staircase that leads right to the front door, we heard a huge crash come from downstairs and we all screamed. I'm not sure why, but my first thought was to grab the youngest and told the older girls to run down the stairs and out the front door. We all sprinted out the front and directly across the street to the neighbor's house. After we got to the front door, I set the girls down and turned to look at the house. I was horrified to see a person run out of the kitchen and bolt directly for the front door. As the neighbor opened their door, we all pushed our way in and shut it. I watched from the window as the intruder ran out the front door and around the back of the house. When the police got there, I told them everything. They called the girl's parents, and about an hour later they told us they caught someone a few neighborhoods away. Someone else had called and said they were trying to break into their shed. Turns out, this guy was dangerous. Like, really dangerous. His girlfriend was found dead at their apartment, and he had been breaking into a number of houses, trying to steal valuables to try to ditch town. The thought of what could have happened if he came upstairs terrifies me. It was time for our annual family trip to Northern California that we take in the summertime. It has always been a fun time going to see my grandparents, but ever since my grandpa was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, it's just not been the same. My grandma takes care of someone who's a shell of his former self. He doesn't remember me or any of my siblings anymore. This has put a damper on the family trip, but we still try and capture the magical feelings from years past. I'm a 19-year-old girl, and all of my siblings are older than me. So when they all decided to go out to the bars with my parents, it meant I was staying at the lake house with Grandma and Grandpa for the night. Dinner with my grandma is always nice, and Grandpa doesn't talk much, so it was just really the two of us. My grandma had a long day and asked if I would watch my grandpa while she showered and got ready for bed. I obviously agreed. I sat watching TV with my grandpa in the living room. "Do you see them too?" my grandpa said to me. "See who?" I responded. My grandpa continued to tell me that at night, he sees people outside his window whenever he can't sleep. It was getting pretty late, so this definitely freaked me out, but I figured he was just confused. I told him that I didn't see anything, and he responded by saying, "Well, sometimes they even make it in the house. But I don't mind because they take care of me." I later asked my grandma about what he was saying to me to see if she had heard him say something similar before. She had no idea what I was talking about and told me Grandpa can say some crazy things sometimes. So after my grandparents went to bed, the rest of my family got home from the bars pretty drunk and were making lots of noise. Suddenly, my grandma came out very unpleased and told them she needed to be asleep by 1 a.m. Everyone was in bed and had fallen asleep by 12:30. I seemed to randomly wake up at 3:10 in the morning, and as me and my older sister were sharing the couch in the living room, I noticed she was awake as well. I asked her why she was awake, and she didn't have an explanation. Just a weird coincidence, I figured. It was then that we heard a noise in the basement, like glasses clashing together as if someone was mixing something together. This is very odd because the basement is unfinished, and nobody ever goes down there. My sister and I were a little spooked, but she ultimately went back to sleep. I stayed up for a little longer and noticed in the corner of the very dark room that there was a shadowy figure of a man wearing an old medical mask. I rubbed my eyes to see if it was real, and then when they opened, the man made a dash for me and I completely blacked out. I woke up the next morning still in the same fear I was when I saw the man running towards me. I asked my sister if she remembers being awake at that time. She told me that I was dreaming all of it. That would make sense since nothing else happened to me, but it felt so real. That day, my family hung out by the lake, and they were talking about the night before. The weird thing is, when my mom told us all the story about her sleeping that night, she said she was intoxicated but randomly woke up at 3 in the morning to see my dad also awake. My dad claimed he did not know what she was talking about, but she swore that it happened. I noticed a worried look on her face. When I got some alone time in the kitchen with my mom, I asked her what happened when she woke up. She said that she left out that a man stood in the corner and dashed at her, making her black out. I was terrified, and I knew it would be hard to sleep that night. After dinner, my whole family went out onto the dock while I stayed back to watch more TV with my grandpa. I asked him, "What do these people look like that wander outside?" He explained to me that it's hard for him to see, but when they do come inside, he only ever sees them for a little bit until he falls asleep. Going to bed that night was very tough. I couldn't fall asleep. I refused to look outside out of the fear of what I would see, but around 3 a.m. once again, my sister woke up on the couch. She was delusional but definitely awake, and I knew for sure I wasn't dreaming this time. After hearing the clanking in the basement, I got the courage to get off the couch and look around. I explored the living room and then walked into the kitchen where the basement door was. When I turned the light on, I was spooked and freaked out to see my grandma wide awake. She had on black clothes and told me it was time to go to bed. I didn't want to argue with her, so I went to the couch and put my face under the blanket until I could finally get some sleep. The next morning, I asked my grandma why she was up so late. She said she was getting some water, but that didn't explain why she was so serious about me going back to bed. When everyone went out on the boat that day, I said I was a little sick and wanted to stay back. I took this opportunity to explore the house and see if I could find anything. When I went deep into my grandma's closet, I saw something I couldn't believe. It was one of those masks I saw the man in the corner wearing. When I went to the basement, I discovered mason jars full of random liquids, as well as letterings on the wall that seemed satanic at the very least. That night was easily the weirdest. Once it was time to go to bed, my grandma pulled me aside and said to me, "You know you've upset them, right?" Who did I upset? What is she talking about? At 3 o'clock tonight, I need you to meet me in the basement, she said with a serious look on her face. She got up and went into her room. At 3 o'clock, I went into the basement, and it was completely empty. "Hi there," I heard from the corner. I looked, and one of the men emerged. "You're going to make your grandpa feel better now," he said. I turned to run for the stairs and was met with 5 more people wearing those masks. They started chanting my name and took a knife to my throat as I blacked out. I woke up the next day in the car on the way home. My dad explained that my mom started to feel really sick and that we needed to get home early. My mom looked at me with a calm face and smiled. "Grandma told me that you were talking to Grandpa a lot. Don't worry, honey. He's just sick."